Alrighty, good afternoon, everyone. It's fantastic to have you all here today. Thank you so much for everybody who's registered, and congratulations to those people who put their time and effort into making sure that they come along today. And sorry, I'm just checking. I just had a little light go out on here, so I'm just a little skeptical that power may have just lost the plot on me a little bit here, so I'm hopeful that you can still hear me as clear as a bell there. So that's a wonderful way to start a webinar, isn't it? Just a little bit of responsiveness under pressure there, but we shall live with it and box on. Yeah, fabulous to have you all here about a topic that I guess I had the chance to do a little bit more of recently, a little bit of deep learning. I've just returned from a holiday, and our family holiday that we took over to the UK, and perhaps that's why you've sort of seen a couple of newsletters from me recently, is because we sort of very much took that opportunity to try to take a holiday from the mental energy required to run our businesses and run our organisation. So we really decided to take that break. But obviously, when you decide to go to the UK, there's significant downtime on some very long haul plane rides, and gave me the chance to do a little bit of deep learning, a little bit of thinking about the way that I work, and I tried to I guess really challenge myself to step out of the ways that we might typically learn. I tried not to just think about what I was doing. I tried not to think about what I already know. I tried not to think about what I could remember that other people were doing, but to really create, but to really design new ways of going about things. And that's, I guess, the gist of what I'd like to bring to you today, is that it is just so critically important that we challenge ourselves and that we challenge others in the way that we conduct learning. So I guess in me pitching what today is all about, it's for anybody who has to run a learning experience. So whether that means somebody who's here today because you run the odd workshop or seminar within your organisation, whether you coordinate and ask of other people that they bring in, you might be the L&D coordinator for your business, and you're looking for people who are taking learning to the next level and not just doing what other people have already done. And I think that today's topics are the deep learning compulsions that I'm going to put for you today are what you should be looking for in the people that you bring into your organisation to train people up, because otherwise your learning just allows you to sort of swim along with the pack. And I think that it's critically important that our learning is what distinguishes us from that pack. It allows us to take a step further. I thought I'd begin today's webinar with a quick little story, actually. For most people who know me know that my background is with schools, and I'm a former teacher and a former school principal, and had some wonderful opportunities to do some learning design as a principal of a brand new school. And one of the things that stands out for me in the work that I still do with schools is the way that young teachers, when they come into the profession, tend to default to things that they started learning even when they were really small, when they were first landing in the learning environment. And they are things that encourage us to think at a very superficial level, not a deep level at all. And the other day I was working with a fabulous teacher in one of the schools that I work with out at Colac Secondary College in country Victoria, a young fella called Chris in his very first year of teaching. And he's to be absolutely honest with you, he's a fabulous young teacher with enormous potential. And he was running a social studies lesson with a group of students around livability, and they were looking at the concept of livability in terms of cities. And at the end of it, we had a bit of a chat about how he was going with that lesson and how he thought it went, and how engaged the students were, how productive they were, how much learning they got done, how much work they got done. And we realised that we probably focused a little bit on an alternative version of the 3 R's. You might remember that the 3 R's typically have been reading, writing and arithmetic. But we realised that what we were asking the students to do in that lesson was to recall, to remember and regurgitate. So we were asking them facts about what makes a city livable. All you've got to do is remember whether you'd seen something before, a category that makes that work. We asked them what cities were livable, and all you need to remember is that, often Melbourne's referred to quite highly in there. A lot of people remember that that there are 3 Australian cities on the top 10 ranked. Sometimes they remember that other cities come from countries like Switzerland and Germany. And then if you can find some of those facts in your head, all we really ask them to do is to regurgitate them. Just, could you spit them out for us? So the really cool part about the day we spent together was that we then had the opportunity later in the day to run the same lesson with a different class. And Chris and I agreed that what we would do in running that lesson was to ask better questions. We weren't going to ask any questions. So we weren't going to ask them to recall, to remember, or to regurgitate. We're going to ask them to do things like discriminate between the factors that make a city livable. Which one do you think is more important? We were going to ask their opinion within those factors. So when it came down to determining things like, for instance, weather is one of the things that contributes to a city's livability, we asked them to talk about, well, for them though, what weather are they looking for? And at one end of the room, we asked the students to walk to that end of the room if they wanted hot and sunny weather, for instance, a tropical climate, whether they thought that made a city livable. And at the other end was about whether they thought that a cool, temperate climate would make a city livable. And we asked them to stand anywhere they liked on that continuum. We asked them to describe what the perfect city would be like for them. And then we asked them to predict, when we gave them certain cities, which would be more livable than others. And the last thing we did was we asked them to design. So we took them through an exercise by the end of the lesson where, first of all, they had to pick a city that reflected their preferred livability factors in a city. And then we asked them to design one from scratch, to make up a new city, to tell us where they would put it on the globe and what things they would have in that city that would make it eminently livable. The output, what we noticed was that we asked an enormous amount more of those Year 7 students in the second lesson. We not only asked them to think in a more deep way, but we asked them to produce more, which can be fraught when you're working with teenagers. Ask them to do more, and do I have to? This is too hard. I don't know. And you know what? They just didn't. They just didn't. They thought and they contributed at a much better level. Their output, what they produced, was far better than the first group, the control group, if you will, in the morning. And what Chris articulated to me, which I found incredibly interesting, was that he said that teaching was easier in the second group. So conducting that learning when we decide to break out of the 3 R's and ask more of people is actually what makes the process of having to run a learning experience a lot easier, a lot less labour intensive. And you know what, I don't want to undersell myself a little bit here, but I'm all for things that make our life a little bit easier. I'm a little bit of a slacker, and if we can be more effective with less effort, then I don't think that that's a pursuit lacking any nobility. I think that would be a really good thing. So I just wanted to share that with you, because I think that sometimes we see the idea of going deep in our learning as being incredibly challenging, incredibly difficult, a real stretch, a real strain on the brain, and it needn't be. It's actually about creating an experience that people want to be in. The truth about these Year 7s, they wanted to be in the more challenging environment. They wanted to be pushed harder. We just needed to find a way to do it. And one of the simple methodologies that Chris and I had that had a profound effect upon them was just to take the determination to ask better questions. And so that's where we worked from, the notion of asking better questions. So that's the foundation upon which this webinar today is built for you, is that we want to ask better questions of people. And what I want to show you today is 7 deep learning notions or compulsions or ideas or concepts, or, to be honest, challenges that I hope you put to the people that you have to work with when you're building a learning environment or a learning experience for them. So let's get cracking. I began the last webinar with a quote from Malcolm X, and there are some really cool photos of Malcolm X, and this clearly is not Malcolm X. This is a really clever fellow called John C. Bean, and he's a professor in the United States, but he came up with a quote that's not quite as memorable, not quite as well known as Malcolm X, and so, you know, we can get that, we can live with that. But what I loved about what he says here is that he says, as the students cross the threshold from outside to inside, they also cross the threshold from superficial learning motivated by grades, which means they're just trying to get through. The output of the learning that we immerse ourselves in when we get superficial is basically, can I get this over and done with and put it behind me? Not exactly motivating, is it? But he says that when we cross that threshold into deep learning, we're motivated by engagement with questions. So it's about the quality of the questions that we put in front of people, that if we really want to motivate them, if we really want to have them produce something both within and then after the learning experience, Bean's telling us that the quality of the questions we ask is absolutely critical. And he said their transformation entails an awakening. Oh, wow. And this is, as a lifelong educator, this is where I sort of get a little bit warm and fuzzy. Even perhaps a falling in love. They actually fall in love with how to learn. And it is an enormous competitive advantage to your organisation to fill it with people who, one, view themselves as good learners, and secondly, truly are, fantastic learners. They just do stuff while your back's turned that you were never going to anticipate. A fabulous educator who's renowned throughout the world called Sugata Mitra refers to it as emergent phenomena. It means that the great facilitators of learning know that you just put things in the way, you just put things in place and let the others get out of the way, and sometimes some really fantastic things happen that you would never have anticipated. Mitra's work involved the hole-in-the-wall experiment in the slums of India, where he put English-speaking computers, if that makes any sense to you, he put English, embedded computers, if you will, in the walls of slums in India where nobody spoke English, thinking that he would be able to prove to people that you need teachers. You can't just put the tools there and walk away. And what do you know? These kids in the slums of India worked out how to use these computers, who couldn't speak English and had no idea of how to access these computers at first, but they taught themselves. And so this is about just putting the conditions in place. For us here, we're talking about questions today, but really what we're talking about here is how we can create learning cultures. The culture just happens when you fill your organisation with people who are enthused by learning and who have a high level of capability to be able to learn independently, and also definitely with others as well. So we're going to take Mr. Bean's example today rather than Mr. X's example, but I reckon you can draw inspiration from all gamuts of people across the globe, and I certainly am a fan of what John Bean has got to tell us here. Okay, next in line. Sorry, before we get moving today, a couple of things I want to point out to you. First of all is that when we are talking about deep learning, you're going to look at even the 7 deep learning challenges that I put to you today, and you're going to go, oh boy, where do I start with all this? So, second thing, one of the things I want you to understand about today is that I am going to fly reasonably quickly, but I do want you to not panic about that. I want you to actually just sit back and enjoy the webinar. We're going to send you a recording of the webinar anyway at the end of today, so you can watch it again if you need to, do that to get yourself into it. But I also want you to know that there's a couple of things you're going to be able to do at the end of the webinar to take another step if you find that that's going to be of value to you in your work or to your organisation. I'll give you a couple of little things that you'll be able to do to be able to do that as we go. So keep that in mind. Don't panic about that. We are going deep. We are going quickly today. Don't panic. I'm going to give you the opportunity to be able to do and know more as we move forward. And the second thing I want you to understand as we move into the content of the webinar today is that I actually want you to step up as a learner today. And what I mean by that, I want to be really honest here. I can turn on the old school teacher if I need to. I can see all your names, all you wonderful people who are on the webinar today, and I expect you to step up. And there's a couple of ways you can do it. First of all is that you can contribute by adding to the question or chat box, depending on the version of GoToWebinar that you've got. The question box can be for popping something in there that you want me to elaborate on a little further, or you might have a yeah, but, or what about type question that you'd like to throw into the middle of some generic content. Generic content can be really useful to you. Contextualized content in one of your questions is something that can be highly valuable, and I would bet that it wouldn't just be valuable to you, but probably also to the many other people who are on the webinar today. So I really want to encourage you to use that question box if you wish. The other thing you can do, should you be feeling brave, is that you can see on your control panel there a little hand, and that gives you the opportunity to put your hand up. Now I'm going to keep an eye on the question box, but also on the attendee list. And if anybody here today were to put their hand up, what I can do from here is just remotely unmute you. I can hear your question, and we can have a little back and forth verbally, which can be a little bit quicker and a little bit less cumbersome than the question box. So if you're feeling brave and you feel like you can contribute in that way, please do. If you put your hand up, sometimes I don't get to it straight away, but I will make a habit throughout the webinar. You'll probably hear me pause because multitasking is not my strong suit. You'll probably hear me pause, and I will make an attempt to make sure that I get to your question in time as we go through the webinar. He pauses for coffee. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so let's get into what we're talking about with these challenges. Now, the first challenge that I want to put to you today is what we need to ask people to do is a little like what I did with the Year 7s and what Chris and I did with those Colac Year 7s the other day was to ask them to design. And this was the activity that we asked them to do that was the longest. So of all the little things that we asked them to do along the way through that 75-minute lesson, the one that we asked them to do that was the most significant task, the biggest task, the longest task, was where we asked them to design their own city. And they really engaged incredibly deeply in it. So what we need to do in our organisation is start to ask people, instead of just asking them to meet, could we occasionally ask them to design a better way to meet? Instead of asking them to get their work done, can they design a better way to work? Can they design, for instance, even new products? Sometimes there's a latent or an untapped wealth of knowledge and ideas and potentials within your team that we don't get to because we just don't ask them to design. We just don't ask them to. We sometimes quarantine the design to the design people, and we forget that everybody's a designer. We are all born with inherent creativity within us, and we're all born to see solutions to problems. We're also born to see better pathways forward, and we know that because all you need to do is to bug your people when they go to drinks after work. You'll hear all the ideas, you'll hear all the better ways that things should be done. And what we want to do is to take those conversations out of the pub and we want to bring them back into the workplace in some way. I think we ask people to perform more than we ask them to design in workplaces, and we do it to our own detriment. So we need to get clearer about stepping up and asking people to step into that design space if we want them to do some really fantastic things. The second challenge that I think you should put to people is to write. Now, this sounds a little odd, but when I spoke a minute ago about those fantastic ideas that exist within your organisation, sometimes they get spoken about. Sometimes, and like I said, it can sometimes happen in the wrong place. It can happen at the pub after work. And sometimes it can happen in the tea room. And sometimes it can happen in conversations on weekends. And sometimes it can happen at work, but those ideas don't get captured. A very clever person whose work I'm a fan of following is a writer called Amelia Harper. And she says that there's risk attached with not getting your people to write. And the risk is that ideas are wasted. She calls it idea wastage. And she says that because what happens when people write is that they think about not only what the idea is, but they think about how they can transfer it into the hands of other people. So the last thing we want, I guess, is wouldn't it be awful, I guess, if you even think about that on a global scale outside of your organisation? Wouldn't it be terrible if someone had the cure for cancer, but they just didn't know how to articulate it for other people? They just didn't bother to sit down and write through, unpack that idea in a way that other people are able to climb into it, to access it, to potentially even criticise it, to synthesise it, to add to it, and then to have it come out the other side as something that could do something as profound as curing cancer, if it was peace in the Middle East or whatever it might be. Harper says that what we need to do is to compel our people to write things down. This is something that I took on when I was school principal. So I used to often ask people for a business case. When people would come to me and say, we really think that we need to bring this into our school, and I'd say, well, that's a really good idea. You see, what I know about myself is that I'm highly motivated by stories and by hearing things verbally, and I can agree to them far too quickly when the emotion of that conversation motivates me to do so. But if I ask people, I said, that's really interesting. You've got my attention. I'd say, you've got my attention. You know what? I'd love it if you would put that together in a 2-page business case for me. In a 2-page business case, what happens is that they take some of the emotion out of it for them and allows me to see more of the detail of the proposal that they're putting forward for me. It allows me to think things through, and then one of 4 things can happen when I get that, when I look at that written 2-page business case for a new idea in my school. The first one is that I can say, yeah, but. So I could say, that yes, this seems like a good idea, but I think that this also needs to be added, or this needs to be changed in order for me to be able to approve it. The second thing that could happen is I could say no, but. So I could say, no, I don't like that idea, but if we were to do this, then perhaps it could become more palatable and we could revisit it. You can see already, even though we've come up with two options here, sometimes with the verbal of an idea, it's really just a yes or a no. We don't refine it heavily enough. When people write down detail, we can start to get into that. And then I guess two other options that start to come when we eliminate the binary yes and no is that we say yeah and. So I would say, actually, I see that there's potential in this, but I think it needs to be bigger. I think it needs to step into other areas of the school or other areas of the business for it to be effective. And the other one, of course, is no and. So I think that, this is the one that probably bobs up less, but we say no, and it's highlighted for me that there are some other practices that equally are as corrosive or invaluable or toxic in the organisation that need to be addressed as well. When we get out of the binary idea of whether an idea is a good one or a bad one, we get good at refining. And this is an R that I think we should embrace in our businesses far more than the old ones of recall, remember, and regurgitate. Refining ideas is a high-level thinking skill. It's a deep learning activity. And if we were to step people into that notion of refining through asking them to write, I'll build that scaffold for people so that they can climb into those ideas, then I think we do a really valuable thing in our businesses. Okay, deep learning challenge number 3 is to compose. Now, I spoke about this last time when I talked about in the last webinar when I talked about future-proofing your people, and I spoke to the notion of being able to compose new things as being incredibly central to what business needs to be in the future. The idea of replicating, the idea of making only a tiny bit better, is something that we're not going to need so much of in the future. So what we need is people who can create from scratch. So the notions of composing is being able to bring people back to art. Perhaps even, I think the notion of composing sits above the notion of creating, of being creative. Composing is about working creatively towards product. Now, whether that's obviously product is a piece of music, or whether it's a new process for not only your customers, but also for within your organisation, or whether it's just composing a new strategy for your organisation, it's about making sure that we're unencumbered by others. Really good composers, the world's best musical composers, and I speak not only of the Mozarts and Tchaikovskys of the world, should have known better than to use that name in a webinar, shouldn't I? But even more recent composers, recent writers, you often can't tell that they've been inspired by others because the work is so original. So we want to encourage people occasionally to create from scratch, to compose something new. And it's a capability that not only creates something quite regularly that is of high value for your organisation, but it's a skill. It stretches the brain. It's something that after you compose, after you go through the awkward frustration of composition, and if we think about people who do compose are often complaining about things like writer's block, or the flawed geniuses that are the fabulous composers in history have always had periods of depression and difficulty. So this sounds a little bit fraught, but what they do is they're not satisfied with just taking what someone else did and making it a little bit better. They know it's got to be original, and so the notion of asking people to occasionally compose new strategy is a really important thing to do. One of my favourite also direct learning challenges is putting before people the challenge to modify things. This sounds, I guess, sometimes a little counterintuitive. I'm not asking you to come up with to be able to genetically modify a new ear of corn like the picture that you can see before you, but people who are able to say, we see something that has potential within it, but we just need to do it a little differently. We see something that exists already that is of value to people in some way, but we think that if we just twist it, if we just do something a little different with it, that we could do some really incredible stuff with it and actually create something that's incredibly groundbreaking, and where new growth and new opportunities genuinely emerge from. I want to give you 3 examples of really fantastic modifications that businesses have taken on for incredible commercial gain. The first one's called outer wall. Now, outer wall is basically they took the notion of what did they see already that could be modified in a way that people would want to engage with it. And outer wall took the notion of ATMs, automatic teller machines. And they said, you know what happens with automatic teller machines is that people go to them, they put in a card and they take out money. What else could they put in and then take out money? And what they came up with was the notion of what has everyone got lying around that they need to get rid of that we could actually get value from. And they came up with mobile phones. And so what's bobbing up all around Europe is this opportunity to walk up to an outer wall ATM, which just sits in the streets of the town, streets of the city, just like an ATM. Doesn't have to be attached to a business. And if you've got an old phone hanging around, you walk up to it, you put it in the outer wall machine. It recognises the phone. It checks how capable and how functional it is and whether it's being dropped in a river or not. And it determines for you what the value of that phone is, and it gives you some money for it. Now, they obviously take that phone away and they on-sell it, or they break it down for parts and they make a fantastic profit out of it themselves. But people are really happy to get a reduced price for the value of the phone because they're certainly not getting any money for it while it's sitting around in their drawer at home. I thought to myself when I looked at that, I thought, oh yeah, that's a clever idea. I guess some people would be interested in that. And I thought to myself, would I be? Would I be interested in that? And I went and had a look in my kitchen. And now it is very true that myself and my wife and two teenagers in the house, so there's a chance of some stray technology lying around. And I opened that drawer that Michael McIntyre in his wonderful comedy videos would call the man drawer. And I found six. I found 6 mobile phones that are just lying around in our house. Some of them that definitely Fred Flintstone would be really proud of. There's some old ones in there. But they're not doing anything for us. And I thought, wow, if down the road here in Dramana there was a little outer wall there, I could just take them down the next time I was going to the shops, and I might actually leave the shop with a couple of $100 in my back pocket. Wouldn't that be fantastic? What a wonderful way to see an opportunity and modify it so that it could be of commercial gain to your enterprise. The second example is one called View Intelligent. View Intelligent developed window glass. And the way they've developed this window glass is that, as we all know, light and heat are refracted by glass. And they've developed a special glass that does it incredibly well, and it moderates the temperature of the room. So what the View Intelligent glass can do is it changes its refractive ability in accordance with how warm the room is. So if it needs to bring some more light and some more warmth into the room, the glass adapts to the light and warmth that's coming in, and refracts more of it into the room. Some shutters actually come across the glass when there's too much light and warmth coming into the room, and some of these have been included in a skylight kind of way, but it very much is a feature of rooms and homes where they've been rolled out in Europe, and a lot of these buildings have been able to either eliminate their power bill, or they've been able to drastically reduce it by rates of up to 80 and 90% by the use of this View Intelligent window glass. Another really clever thing to do, they've just seen that we already have windows. What if, and for most homes, through the windows and doors is where the heat is lost. But they've gone, you know what if we used the windows to improve the heat and the light within a home rather than lose the heat and light within a home, and developed a product that can do it. They took the existing product and then flipped it into something that was more highly valuable for them. And the third example, I thought this was really clever, and maybe this makes me a complete learning and innovation nerd, but the Desso Airmaster carpet, if you go and look that one up, is an absolute ripper. We think about carpets in our home. One of the problems that we have with carpet is that they attract and they store dust and bugs and mites and things like that. We think, oh no, in time you think, oh, you wouldn't want to lie down in your carpet because there's just so much muck in there, and occasionally we know that you've got to step beyond vacuuming and you've got to get someone in to professionally clean your carpet because of all the muck that's in there. And what they found is that Desso said, well, what if we invented a carpet that not only collected it but was really, really good at it? And so they've developed an easy to clean carpet that if you vacuum it, you're able to take out all of the pollutants, and the carpet is really good at pulling the pollutants out of the air and stores in the carpet. So it actually makes the air quality in your home far more effective. Families that have been taking this on have realised that if they've got kids that have asthma, they haven't had to go and purchase things like air purifiers or air humidifiers, because so much of the humidity and the pollutants and the bugs that are in the air have been drawn out of it by the carpet. And if you vacuum it regularly enough, it's very easy to vacuum, then it'll do that job for your home without having to stick something like that in the corner, turn it on, put vapor in it, put water in it, all of those little things that people have needed to do in the past. How clever. So the notion of asking your people to see something that already exists and to just turn it a little bit, just to twist it a little bit, to come up with something that is a modified version of what they saw originally, but is significantly better. There's actually a 180-degree flip on what that product was originally designed for, can be an incredibly valuable thing for your organisation to take on the notion of. A couple more I want to bring to you. Number 5 is the notion of being able to anticipate. Now, quite clearly in the picture that I've used to demonstrate anticipation to you today, quite clearly demonstrates that the industry that has been able to get ahead of the wonderful motivation that sits behind anticipation would be the gambling industry. We are inherently built, if you like, to anticipate what we think is going to happen next, and to the point where we will actually, gamble our wealth on our ability to do it. But if we can actually flip that a little bit, what happens in organisations that get good at being able to ask their people to anticipate. They ask them to do things metaphorically, like see around corners. What do you think are the potentials of what's going to be coming in, 5 minutes, 5 months, 5 years' time? Is that it flips something that is an incredible anchor on our people's not only well-being but on their productivity, which is anxiety. Your organisation, all of a sudden, when we get good at anticipating, sees anxiety as, anxiety is often caused by the absence of a plan, which means we don't know what's going to happen next. And all of a sudden, when we start anticipating, we get more comfortable with not knowing what's going to happen next. And your organisation gets better at delayed gratification as well. So it means that they're good at being able to look into the future and knowing that whatever it is that they put in place now, we may have to wait. We may have to see what's going to happen, because in our organisation we anticipate. This is something that's not only good for being able to come up with new strategy and have people who know that the payoff for it is not going to be immediate, or it's not going to be exactly what they expected, but over time what happens is it's actually incredibly good for brain health, wonderful for emotions. It actually brings things like excitement and joy into your organisation. So therefore it becomes good for well-being. And in the end, there's even some literature out there that this is really fabulous for physical health, which I find a fascinating concept. So I think it's really important to ask people to predict or anticipate what they think is coming, or when we do this, or if we do that, what do they anticipate will be the outcome of it, rather than just stopping at the point of saying, is this a good or a bad idea? Could we anticipate what the growth might be on this notion if we were able to let it run for 6 months or so? Anticipation, as Frankenfurter from the Rocky Horror Picture Show would say, anticipation can be something that's a very exciting thing to have in your team, and it's also a very incredibly productive concept to have as well. A couple more concepts before I let you off the hook today. Number 6 is this notion of assembling or constructing. Now, in assembling and constructing, my apologies there. Assembling and constructing is about not just accepting information or content when it's delivered to us, but do something concrete with it. There's a lot of research around these days that while we are entering an age of robotics and artificial intelligence, that a lot of people, that means that a lot of the work that people will do in the future with their hands is the kinds of stuff that robots will not be able to do. Robots will be able to follow procedure, but they will be less responsive to the human, the human mistakes, the errors, and to the human nuances of working than we would be. So really important that, and anybody, I guess, who's had that challenge of assembling something that's come from IKEA would be very aware that it can be a frustrating type of activity to take on, to assemble or to construct, but it is something that people get great personal benefit from. The practice it gets people good at the practice of dealing with complexity versus complication. Now, if I were to unpack that just a moment, complexity is something that's a very human thing. Complexity is a very responsive thing. If you think about it in terms of, say, roundabouts versus traffic lights, roundabouts are very complex in that they can deal with multiple different circumstances, even though it's really just a circle. Traffic lights are very complicated. They take something where there's a lot of moving parts and they seek to control it. When we ask people to assemble and to construct, but not to just follow the plan, what happens is that they start to draw themselves towards complex ways of working. They look for ways that human beings could interact with this in a better way, which is really cool, really cool. One of my favourite stories of assembly and construction comes from my time in schools, and it's when I opened a brand new school, it was a government school, and being a government school, things were very disorganised before we opened, and we got the keys to the school 48 hours before it opened. And my poor two prep teachers, Karen and Lara, who were just wonderful educators, I was asking them to work together in a big space. There were 4 things that they were asked to bring together. It was an approach called restorative practices, which is about relationships and conduct and behaviour. We were asking them to co-teach, so we're asking them to do a very unique way of doing things. We're asking them to do an early childhood approach called play-based learning and investigation, and we're asking them to work in a cooperative learning space as well, which is about always having the children working together in a very organised kind of way, rather than just whacking them in groups and hoping for the best. I gave them the keys to their classroom 48 hours before the kids arrived with some bunch of furniture that was wrapped up in plastic, and I knew that these 4 big pillars were going to be important across our school, and I said, look, just do the best you can in trying to make a place that works like that. I had it in my head what that would probably look like as an educator, as a leader of that organisation. When I arrived on Monday morning with the students and walked into Karen and Lara's classroom, what I saw was absolutely nothing like I'd imagined. It was infinitely better. And what it was a little bit of what Shigata Mitra spoke to, like I said earlier, that emergent phenomena of just give them the tools and get out of the way sometimes and just see what they construct, see what they assemble, see what they put together. And what they did with their contextual knowledge of what it means to work with really little people was quite phenomenal. And to this day, I think that it's a model that has not only not been seen anywhere else across Australia, but it was of enormous benefit to the students who came into that classroom in that year. And the last one that I want to point out to you today, the last deep learning challenge, would be around combining. Now, this is something that is just highly underrated in terms of the way that people work, is the ability to create new product by looking, and I guess we spoke earlier on about that notion of being able to compose or to modify. Modify is where what you do is take one product and twist it a little bit. This is about saying, could we take 2 products and smash them together? Could we mash them up and get something that people will find will be of huge value to people? So there are 3 examples that I thought of when I was preparing for the webinar today that really give that life. They are ridiculously simple, and some of them are so recent that it's embarrassing to people who are innovators, I reckon. The first one will be an alarm clock. If you think about an alarm clock, it's really just a bell and a clock smashed together. But we obviously, only in the last 100 years or so, if we had alarm clocks, we certainly couldn't live without them now. And they've been transformed into technology, and we all have a digital alarm clock, or we use our phones or something like that now. Very few of us have the example on the screen. But the truth is, it began by smashing a bell and a clock together. The second one, I just honestly can't believe that we put men on the moon before we realised that combining a suitcase with a shopping trolley would make it a lot better. So putting wheels on, we didn't have wheels on suitcases until very recently, which to me is incredibly embarrassing to people who invent things. And then the third one for me would be a fax machine. A fax machine was really only a combination of a phone and a photocopier. And how could we actually have messages be able to be sent in paper form? Really fantastic, and were absolute game changers for the people that invented them. Of course, not all mashups. Not all smash-ups work incredibly well. Though if you look at some of the ones that would be, I guess this one's a debatable one, whether you're a fan of chips and Vegemite coming together. I think that's a debatable one. One that would be less debatable would be the idea of dairy milk chocolate with Victoria Bitter beer. I don't think that one was ever destined to work particularly well, but perhaps the worst one I've found to look for failed combinations here would be the Tabasco flavoured condom. I just think that one's, was doomed to failure before it even became a concept, that one. So it's true that when we look to combine, we invite risk. Some combinations work brilliantly and you will transform and create a new growth opportunity that you just never saw coming. And then the other one would be that you might just create something that fails. Get used to it. Get used to it. All deep learning is risky. All deep learning comes with that inherent risk of when you want to create something fantastic, there's always the chance that you'll create something different. But this is where that genuine competitive advantage comes from. So they're my 7 direct learning, deep learning challenges. I keep saying that, deep learning challenges that I really want you to take on. And I guess what I wanted to do is just leave you with one moment to do some deep learning. So what I want to do is play a combination here for you, a 3-minute video that'll allow you to just take a little moment to do your own little spot of thinking. And it's a wonderful little video that, oops, it's decided not to play, I think, on me there. Let's see if I can give that another crack at it. No, it's decided not to play. I do apologise, guys. For some reason, the little player's not going to work there for me. But I'll tell you what I will do. I'll invite you to jump onto YouTube and go and look at it with the two products that have just been smashed together. One is the notion of an igloo and a hotel being smashed together. And if you go and have a look at the Ice Hotel in Sweden, it is a glorious example of two concepts being brought together in a way that produces something that just has been seen nowhere in the world before. And the success that is coming in a commercial way from the smashing together of an igloo and a hotel in the Ice Hotel in Sweden is a glorious thing to check out. Apologies, I haven't been able to show it to you there, but something's gone wrong for me technologically. What I want you to do also is understand that you can download the slide deck. Actually, I don't think we've got that there for you today, but if after today you would like to have the slide deck from today, just drop us an email, reply to the email that we're going to send you with the recording of today. And the other thing I wanted to do was to let you know about the webinar that we're going to run next month. So on the Thursday, the 16th of August at 2 p.m. at our usual time, we're going to run a webinar on webinars. So if today you've found an interesting way of being able to learn, if you found this an engaging way to learn, we're going to show you how you can make learning fun for people, how you can take it and turn it into a way that you can bring a concept across to people that captures intellectual property within your organisation. Now, even looking online, I've got the wonderful Alana there. I hope that Alana is considering looking at running some webinars of her own. I'm hoping that she might come along to that one as well, because I know it's going to be of huge value for you. So that notion of being able to run webinars in a way that will work for you is one that I hope you come along to. Hey, thanks so much for coming along today. Really appreciate it. If I can be of any assistance to you, then feel free to check out the various websites, various email addresses, the correct phone number to get in touch with us. Really happy to help if there's any way that we can bring better learning to your organisation. Have a fantastic month, everyone. We'll see you in August for Webinars for Learning.